Let's begin this exploration on parenting by looking at a couple of the problems. Most grown-ups in the United States do not feel like an adult, don't even really know what being an adult is. The majority of families are filled with a roiling mix of unresolved and unintegrated abuse and emotions, which requires careful stepping around and avoiding, and leads to stereotypes of things like Thanksgiving being a nightmare. Many children, by the time they are adults, forget and don't really empathize and remember what it's like to be a tiny infant in relationship with giants. And so it is often a world of giants violating the little people. There's a tremendous amount of amnesia in family systems that leads to things like incest, violence, raging, shaming, being deeply repetitive patterns through multi-generations. The culture's racism and chauvinism and elitism, which in a capitalist system is people who have money are better than people who don't, and the more the better. These things get unconsciously passed on to every child. The majority of children are not only shamed and frustrated and abused in school, but literally loathe it and come out of school with very little life skills. And the majority of children grow up in a variety of very dissociated places from their parents and from the world at large, being spat out of the system at age 18 with very low learning competency, very low knowledge competency relative to what's needed in the world, including economic competency, high amounts of relational shame, symptoms of trauma without knowing how to deal with it, and a clear understanding that to survive the modern teenage world requires deception and the creation of social masks that are designed to withstand the hurricanes of shame and humiliation produced by the culture, as opposed to becoming someone one would aspire and like to be. So let's look at a series of distinctions that I think can lead to a pivoting. This may not be a full 10x improvement, but I think we're hitting minimal 500% improvement with these shifts in focus and distinctions. So the first one is that on the level of the goal. So the goal of parents defaults to, if there's no conscious analysis, the goal is to raise a kid who is normal, who survives, and that means in this culture being independent. So it's like we'd like to be normal and reenact the normal thing, to raise a normal child. And this is a far cry from the optimal goal in this terrain, which is to raise a generation that is a break, that is a leapfrog ahead in intelligence for the entire species. So intelligence is the efficiency with which energy is transformed into sustainable human well-being. And we have been diverging from intelligence in a number of metrics. For example, the United States individual will consume 102 metric tons of garbage in a lifetime. So we've got a massive increase. If you look at 500 years ago on the same land, Native American tribes were consuming less than 10 kilograms of garbage. There was no garbage. There was no idea of garbage. At the death of a Native American Indian, if you buried every single thing they owned, which you would not do, but if you did bury every single thing a Native American owned, it would all biodegrade. All 10 kilograms would biodegrade within a matter of 5 years into material that was nourishing for the underlying ecology. The deer skin would become food for the prairie. Whatever little teeth or necklace, etc., would become minerals in the soil. Zero toxicity in water, soil, or air. The body of the Native American, whether transformed into ash and spread, becoming nutritional fertilizer for the plants, or buried in the ground and becoming nitrogen, etc., without the smoke. Within a paradigm in which things are sacred, there is no garbage. And the raw materials left over were all nourishing to the ecology, and in many cases would not be fully buried, but passed on to other family members who could make use of them. An American is going to produce 90, or is going to consume directly and indirectly. So directly in transportation, but indirectly in the transportation of foods and goods that they consume. So if you buy a pineapple in China and have it shipped over, there's a consumption of gasoline. 90,000 gallons of gasoline will be consumed by an average American. The Native American, not a single gallon of oil or gasoline. An American is going to put 1,500 tons of CO2 into the atmosphere. A Native American, a ton? A couple, you've got wood fires, a couple of tons. There's an efficiency that we've moved away from. Now, at the same time, depression, a sense of meaninglessness. When you're dealing in a dynamic partnership with nature, with horses, with hunting, with engaging in your environment, there's a strong sense of purpose. There's a strong sense of vitality. Every day has a certain amount of meaning. And the anthropologists who have looked at the human brain, it's called Dunbar's Law, understand that a human being cannot have a felt experience of intimacy with more than 150 people at a time. And most of our tribal ancestors, including our Native American ancestors, did not have vast cities of overpopulated individuals, but operated in groups of 30, 50, 70, 150. And the result is a deep sense of intimacy, of knowing and being known. You may or may not be in the top ranking of your cult, of your tribe, but you know everyone. You know their birthdays. You know their names. There's a sense of belonging that in many cases is higher than our own. So when you look at the energy expenditure for well-being, you see that there's 1,000 times more energy being spent, or at least 1,000%. There's a big difference, but we're looking at an incredible increase in energy expenditure. Time, the same. Money, up dramatically. Natural resources, up exponentially. For in many cases, what is a lower quality of life? I feel more dull. I feel more compulsive. I feel more alone. I feel more scared. I feel disconnected. And I feel ashamed of some part of who I am, while consuming thousands of percent more natural resources to maintain what can be a meaningless environment. And so when we look at an order of magnitude increase in intelligence, what we're looking to do is actually learn from the past how to create more sense of meaning and purpose, how to create more sense of value, how to create a higher level of vitality, how to create a higher level of inner and outer development, and how to partner as individuals and as communities to create dramatically higher levels of sustainable human well-being per unit of energy invested. So to raise a generation, what we're looking at is bypassing the chauvinism of the individual, because the chauvinism of the individual says it's all about you, nothing about other people. And so the byproduct of the culture is just lots of narcissistic self-centeredness focused on the individual. But this lacks the opportunity to create vision. If you can imagine 1,000 people with 1,000 2x4s, and each person tries to do what with a 2x4? It's all about you, what you want to do with your 2x4. And so you, cut it into 2-foot lengths? Do you pole vault with it? What do you do with an 8-foot 2x4? Not very much. But if 1,000 people combine their efforts with 1,000 2x4s, you can get exponential returns on investment for the group. You've got the 1 2x4 each, but you can build a temple, you can build a community kitchen, you can build a shelter, a structure to serve as a basis to put large waterproof membranes on. You can do a lot when you move from the myopia of the individual to the dynamics of group synergy. And so the goal to raise a normal kid who survives as an individual, to shifting towards the goal of having a synergistic generation that produces higher levels of well-being than has ever been seen on the planet, with dramatically less consumption of resources simultaneously. That's a measure of intelligence. And of course, to do this, we use a completely different technology. Children have often been shushed, silenced, argued with, told not to think this, told not to see this. One of the most important things to measure throughout a child's development, to the extent that they have language and ability to articulate, is their well-being index, emotionally, physically, mentally, financially, socially, logistically, and spiritually. What is their well-being index? An American may be raised into a polarizing mythology in which God is white and God is good and the devil is black and the devil is bad, and just basically cut the entire universe into two parts and throw half of it out and pit them in combat with one another. That's not a good paradigm for understanding alchemy, flow, chemistry, synergy. A battery, for example, is a synergy of the positive and the negative pole. You get a flow when you bring those two together in a partnership of polarity. We do this in battery chemistry. We do not do it in mythology. We do not create synergies, polarities, and flows with polarities at a cultural level. What we do is we connect the negative and positive charge of distinction and use it to destroy and wear ourselves down. If you look at the typical media production today that's called news, you'll just take something that gets an adrenaline rush, because that's what advertisers want, and you find the two most polarizing figures of that, and then you have them go at each other, which is the equivalent in electrical engineering of taking a battery and taking a wire from your positive to your negative and smoking the whole thing out until it's a shitty mess of nothing, and then saying next and doing it again with the next topic. There's no flow. There's no alchemy. There's no change. There's vast rev-ups of energy directly pitted against one another, and nothing happens. There's no expression. You don't even ask the quote guests to do something, to show a single unit of well-being created by their being there. Are they enjoying it? Usually not. They're both tremendously frustrated by the short time frame. Is the host enjoying it? Who knows? Ratings go up because ratings correlate to adrenaline in an adrenaline-addicted cult. And almost nobody learns anything, and they're so short and truncated. Both people who watched it, who agreed with whatever they agreed with going into it, can use confirmation bias to continue it. This is not intelligent, and we need to raise a generation that actually knows what intelligence is. That intelligence is the formula and the extraction ratio, the efficiency ratio of bringing sustainable well-being out of a minute, out of a dollar, out of a kilogram of rock, whatever it is, that how much sustainable well-being can we create per unit of energy invested. And the other thing is the vision of a culture in which every individual in that culture fulfills their basic human needs. Now, in the hierarchy of human needs, We have survival. We have security of survival. We have love and belonging. Love and belonging is the felt experience when other people include your well-being equally into the equation of deciding what to do. When you have a tyranny that says you have to slave more because you're slaves and you're poor, and I'm going to use that money, that slavery, to create more wealth because I can, you don't have love and belonging. You have exclusion and domination. Love and belonging is the felt experience when your experience is on a par with the other people's experience in the group. If anyone in the group is unconsidered, is left out, you do not have love and belonging for that individual. And that's not usually personal. So the individual represents a demographic. So if one person is actually treated cruelly, that energy is actually spent to escalate their pain rather than to diminish it by the group, there is a demographic representation beneath that occurrence that says all poor people can be treated like shit, and this is part of our demographic that's poor. Which means you understand as a circle witnessing this, that if you're poor, you're not going to be advocated for, that the only people that get treated well in our circle are rich people. So if you're rich, it's fine. But you do not have the freedom to go through a stage of poverty while maintaining your dignity in the incompetence of this circle. You do not have the freedom to maintain your dignity and go through a stage of helplessness in a circle that attacks, blames, and punishes those who helplessly need, which means that every infant in the entire history of the species is, in a sense, downgraded, valued less because it is going through the stage of life that is called needy helplessness. Now, if an individual or the entire species is resented and undervalued going through the needy dependency of infancy, and then is shamed much further if doing so as an elderly person or as someone going through a disability or a broken leg, etc., you have a weakness in the underlying system. That demographic is not being advocated for, which means there's a pressure on the individual psyche not to fight for and advocate for that demographic within, because that means to go against the group. So to create a culture in which every human being meets their human needs to survive, feel secure, have love and belonging, have self-esteem, the freedom to idealize certain dreams, certain values, to be more excellent, to be more kind, to become more confident, to run faster, whatever the ideal is. Every imagination of every child naturally forms an ideal. I want to be like Superman. I want this. I want this. The ideal. And the freedom to develop in a way that earns traction towards the ideal is self-esteem. So you need to have a framework in which this is measured. Who do you most aspire to be like? Who do you want to become? What do you want to become? And is the environment conducive and supportive to an individual developing earned self-esteem by making rapid traction towards that objective? So this is a very important metric of human need and of intelligence in how well we help our young people, particularly our adolescents, realize the people that they want to become. Then we have the development of talent. The exploration in education and in participation in life, the exploration and the noticing that I'm really good at this. I can listen better than 98% of the people. I can look at difficult problems from outside the box paradigm. I can bring color to sound. Like when I listen to sound, I can move that into color and thus facilitate the development of synesthesia within the brain, which is a movement towards integration. I can put sound into color. I can put color into sound. I can touch people in a way that brings aliveness, value, and well-being. I can do this at high levels of competency. So the development, the discovery of, and the development of unique talents. Now, if we trust nature, and we understand that nature is a 5 billion-year-old system, and we understand that we are part of nature, that we are the children of a system that creates diversity and complexity, that's got a 5 billion-year track record of success, of continual innovation in symbiotic, balanced polarities. And we're a part of that. We're a fruit of that process. Well, then you have to trust that the unique talents produced in the joy and the imagination and the well-being of a human being are exactly what nature needs for the next stage of the drama, for the next stage of the game. And having developed those unique talents, bring them out into the world so that they positively touch as many people as possible. So we have the creation of unique abilities and then the bringing those out, the seeing them in action. To watch your healing hands bring delight and wonder to people's faces, to watch your music bring aliveness and humor and bring a room to life. You need to see the felt experience of your impact. You need to see that. And when you're in small groups of 30 to 150 people, this has real meaning. The people you spend time with mean something to you, and you mean something to them, because you've gone through a stage of life together in a sense of extended family and intimacy. There's a sense of meaning. So the other goal, I think, that is the default goal is parents want to have an experience. You listen to Americans talk about whether or not to have a child, and it's like, I'd like to have that experience. So the first thing is the focus on the parent, because there's no discussion as a general rule about whether you would like the child to have the experience of being parented by you, because that's obviously a more mature perspective. The youngest parts of the self are self-absorbed. The oldest and most mature parts of the self are referencing other. Why? Why does the most mature individual, the wisest, the smartest, the most independent, the most self-loving, etc., why does that individual turn most of their attention outward? Because 99.9% of reality is out there. There's so much out there in the unknown. So to focus 100% in here is not an intelligent allocation of intention or of attention. And so you have traumatized, regressed, narcissistic, poorly developed individuals raised by our cult, focusing obsessively on me. But you have mature, well-developed. And this has nothing to do with the individual, by the way. If you're a good, normal, narcissistic American, it has nothing to do with you. Highly traumatic environments that perpetuate chronic pain, in part by making them unconscious, in part by shaming symptoms of pain rather than healing, that lead to high levels of narcissistic, regressed, traumatized grown-ups. Children in grown-up bodies would be a good way to say it. So that's a cultural phenomena. If you're a regressed narcissistic child who wants to have a baby so that you can have an experience, by definition, you are born into a cult, into a culture that did not have the competency to initiate you into adulthood by the time you made that decision. Because an adult, children do not do very well at raising children. They don't do it when siblings are asked to raise siblings. It's a poor design. You need an adult to raise a child. But what if your cult only raises grown-ups and you don't even know what an adult is? It's not having a car. It's not making a certain amount of money. You can do that or not do it at any age. Being an adult is a psychological state. And if you don't produce adults, you don't produce children that are capable of becoming adults. And when you raise children, adolescents, and young adults, and then freeze them in that psychological state, every one of those states is narcissistically self-centered. The child needs, the adolescent wants, the young adult is busy exploring themselves. Only the adult is integrating self-love, self-development, and then turning their attention out to participate into something bigger than themselves. An adult has met their human needs to survive, feel secure, have love and belonging, develop self-esteem, move outward to develop their unique talents, bringing those talents into the world, and then as the initiation into adulthood, participating in something bigger than the ego, bigger than the self. To blossom out of the seed into the seedling, into the plant capable of producing seeds, psychological seeds. The adult is not just the grown-up physiology that is capable of producing other grown-ups. The adult is capable of loving, and in blossoming is capable of sharing the seeds of love. To love someone enough to care enough to see enough to understand enough to empathize enough to succeed at participating in the accelerated meeting of human needs in another person, so that in the experience of doing that competently, they feel safety, pleasure, gratitude, trust, a sense of connection, which alchemizes inside the human heart, inside the human brain, into respect, into gratitude, and into love. I love you. Why? Not because you fucked my wife and lied about this and couldn't become an adult over here and peeled off in your car rather than apologizing. No, that's not why I love you. I love you because as an adult, your outward focus towards me being my best me as a consistent pattern over time fills me with pleasure, fills me with gratitude, with joy, with a sense of thank you, and I trust you. I've become more when I've listened to you over the course of my lifetime. I trust you. And so as I open my mirror neurons, as I open my heart to acknowledge the connection you have promised, because when you do things that are not expedient for you but that help me grow, you're acknowledging an ancient biological connection, an ancient spiritual connection that says that we are part of one system. You're acknowledging a vision of relating to me as part of you, and I feel connected to you because of that. This is an acknowledgement of transcendence. Transcending what? The myopia of the traumatized child, the traumatized adolescent, who remains traumatized until they are loved by an adult. Until they are loved by an adult. So, I want to have an experience for me. I'd like to have that experience of raising a child. Becomes, I would like the opportunity to be an adult for a child. I'd like to integrate my adulthood by curating an experience for a child of being loved by an adult. So you have to know what an adult is. An adult is the person who has loved and integrated their child's attachment and need and desperation, their adolescent's lust and desire and curiosity, their young adult's freedom and moving around to find out who they are, and has blessed, has participated in the self-actualization of that child adolescent, that young adult. That is the adult who's done that, who's integrated the inner self in an effort to ensure survival, security, love and belonging, self-esteem, etc., through the competency of love, to love enough to care about the infant, to care about the child. So an adult is the one who integrates and unifies the whole individual to such an extent that the individual myopia and narcissism of desperation is filled with abundance, and the individual looks outward, not with guilt, not with control, not with I've got to be less selfish. No, it happens naturally. When you deeply and fully love and accept who you are, it's far more interesting out there in the great unknown of the wider world than it is in here. So you turn your attention outward. It happens alchemically. It's an inevitable budding process, emergent process of consciousness and of life. Now, if we look at suppositions and distinctions as well as goals, one thing that is common in parenting today is I've got to prepare my child for the world. And when we look at the world that we have prepared for our child, there are a number of domains where the world that we've prepared for our child is more toxic than the world 200 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. There's a pivot here where there's a default acceptance of the cult, of what's going on, and a sense that it doesn't matter who my child is. I've got to prepare them for the world. I've got to make my child accept the bizarreness of our education system and go through it, to get a job in this weird system and just put up with it, as opposed to I want to create a world that is worthy of bringing a child into. This takes more responsibility, more maturity, than to simply reenact the abuse dynamic of the past. Another default assumption is children should just grow up naturally. And this is, of course, the repetitive nature of cults. Most parents do actually parent relatively similarly to the way that they were parented. Why? Because you don't have to be conscious. Consciousness allows you to edit the template before you reenact it. If you think of making a duplicate digital file, whatever the file is, if you just click copy and paste, it doesn't require any thought. However, if you want to contribute to the development of that digital file, that digital book, that piece of music, you've got to break the file down into its tracks. You can change the mixes, you can reduce a track and add in another track, you can change the speed, etc., in order to contribute to the quality of the end product. One must have consciousness, which means one must have a map of distinctions that say this was the violence level in my household. What is the violence level I would like to create for my child? Meaning I grew up in a family where my father hit me and my mother turned away in disgust of me anytime my father hit me, and never expressed disgust at my father for bullying the shit out of a tiny child. So that's the template that's going to be copied and pasted as a default. Worked for my old man, it'll work for me. This is called intergenerational abuse, and sociologists, psychologists can predict it. Dad fucked little Jenny, and nobody did anything. Little Jenny was 6 years old. Why didn't they do anything? Well, Dad had a temper. Dad had a gun. Who knows? Little Jenny raises up to be a woman who knows that she is worthless, except for her usefulness to satisfying dominant bullying men. Why does she know that? Because it's what she's been programmed. And she also knows that the most important person in the system is a dominant bullying man. So that's who she marries. And when that man fucks her daughter, she knows that to stay alive, you don't intervene. You stay silent, because that's how her mother survived. Copy and paste. Copy and paste. Copy and paste. There's no change. There's no evolution in the system unless you break it down in language, you break it down into data, you have an intelligent goal, you have a current reality, and you have variables, and you use your influence to change the mix before it gets copied and pasted. If you edit out 50% of the violence and then click paste, what you've produced is a 50% less violent pattern. And if your child edits 50% of that violence out, then what they copy and paste is 50% less violent. Left to its own devices, family systems perpetuate in one form or another the mental emotional suppositions of the family system. Girls are inferior to boys. You want to live in that world? Do nothing. We're already in it. We're already in it. Just copy and paste. That's what'll be there. White people are better than black people. Don't worry about it. Copy and paste. That is the template we live in. We live in a sociopathic, barbaric, unnecessarily cruel, chauvinistic cult. When we copy and paste, we will produce micro versions of that same template consistently. So the goal of actually engaging consciousness is the freedom to take adult responsibility for the next generation. And this is admittedly for an intelligent cult that is beyond the narcissism of the immature individual. This is the most sacred. Why sacred? Well, most energy systems in the universe are circular. Most energy systems in the universe are circular. They spiral around. You look at the sun and the moon. You look at the earth and the sun. You look at night and day. You look at birth and death, and birth and death, and birth and death. Life tends to happen in a circle. No energy is created or destroyed according to physics. This energy becomes this energy, then this energy becomes this energy, then this energy becomes this energy, then this energy becomes this energy. So whether you believe in karma, or whether you believe in reincarnation, or whether you just understand that life is a series of circular repetitions at an energetic level, when you participate in creating higher levels of excellence, higher levels of beauty, higher levels of grace, higher levels of goodness, higher levels of truth and efficiency, higher levels of intelligence, you are investing in an energy system that you will forever be a part of. Not your individual ego, thank goodness, but the innate energy out of which you are made is not going to disappear just because the rationalist materialist stuck you in a piece of ground and your blood flows out into the plants. And those plants feed other human beings. In a circular pattern, whatever you create as the future is the future in which you are born into, is a future in which you relive. Whether as a plant, as an animal, as a new ego, as a new form of consciousness. And certainly in the 10,000 cults in human history, most of them have tracked the journey of human consciousness in and out of bodies in a living process. So there's good reason to believe that we may be born into the future that we create and nurture for our children. Now, how dumb do you have to be to engage with the world in a way as to create a higher level of toxicity, a lower level of sustainability, higher levels of cancer, higher levels of depression, mental, emotional disease, and then be born into that world? You have to be at an adolescent or young adult level of intelligence to think that that's a good idea. Adolescents don't want to be bound by consequences in future and want to see what happens if this happens, if that happens. But eventually, they grow up. And children need examples of adults. The nuclear family is the idea that two people, while going to work full-time in equal rights situation, should raise a child. And send them to daycare, all this stuff. This is a very recent idea, and it's a terrible one. The extended community model, where, first of all, you want people around your child who care about their child, which is natural if you spend a lot of time. One of the most disruptive and traumatic elements of modern life is that the amount of time that you will spend with a stranger, someone that has known you for less than a few hours, in a modern world, is perhaps 10,000% higher. So if we take 1,000 years ago and take the per capita, each person, and say how much time is that person 1,000 years ago going to spend with people they know intimately, people they were born with, people they learned how to chop wood with, people they went and carried water with, people they had a baby with, people they watched having a baby, people who they watched being christened, whatever it is, that these important moments of life have occurred with people who know you well. Remember, love begins with loving enough to care, caring enough to see, seeing enough to understand. It takes a lot of quality time to see enough to understand. But if you do understand deeply, you will empathize, which is a huge milestone in the movement. From the initial seedling of love, I feel some love here. Great. You've got a tiny little seedling. Do you love enough to care? That's opening up to its first two leaves. Do you care enough to see? That takes time. It's got to grow into a seedling. Do you see enough to understand? Our cult allows individuals in it to go months without ever spending time with someone who has spent more than a few hours with them. So you go to your local grocery store and they say, "Oh, nice to see you again." But what do they see as you put in your credit card? Do they see you playing golf? Do they see your paintings? Do they see your poetry? What do they see? All they see is you have a credit card. And then you go and do something else. You've never seen that checkout person before. You go online, and the robot online taking your order doesn't know you at all. You drive your car past thousands of people who have never seen you before. And you go on a trip to a country that doesn't know you. And you come home and you go to a rave with people who do not know you. You have a one-night stand with a partner who doesn't know you. You can go months in this cult without spending quality time with a single person who is competent to love you, or with who you are competent to be loved, because it takes a certain amount of quality time. And so the idea of the nuclear family, where it's these two grown-ups who, being good feminists and all that, are off having 2 or 3 jobs preferably. Let's have a 6-job family to make ends meet, right? And pay the babysitter and this and that. And we'll send you to daycare where one adult has 30 kids to watch, right? So, of course, they don't know you very well. That starts the template off. And then you come home and your parents are frazzled and this and busy fighting, so they don't know you very well. And then you spend time with people, and in the modern life of everyone moves every couple of years, you don't really get to know any friends very well. And then a few people hurt you in a sociopathic culture, and you learn that people are scary. And you go through life being unknown. It's a terrible model for raising a child. The extended multi-generational family in a healthy culture is a step forward. And beyond that, small neighborhoods or intentional environments, meaning environments where 70 people have gotten together to raise a healthy quality of life with that intention and some competency, which means data referencing, some competency in doing that. This is what creates a significantly healthier, more diverse, safer, and more secure. We produce people with insecure attachment disorder. I'm one of them. No emotional connection with either parent. Not the feminine, not the masculine. How can you get close to dad when he hits you if you make him feel uncomfortable emotionally, and what makes him feel uncomfortable emotionally is someone getting close to him? So that's off. And mom's in a fantasy world where reality, and certainly your reality, doesn't exist, as most narcissistic children and teenagers are, who are left in that arrested state. Mom's in a fantasy world. The only way to connect with mom is to pretend to be one of the characters in her fantasy. And so, let's try and be a fantasy child. But that's not you. It's not intimacy. You're not being seen. And isolate the child from marriage and work and life. So you see parents, and they won't say the most important truths to their child. They're asking their child to go crazy. Mom and dad love each other as they're busily fighting and arguing and hating. Well, this just teaches a confused map of the word love. And so keeping the child out of the marriage, keeping the child out of the workplace, keeping the child out of reality and putting them through first the fake reality of the presented marriage, and then the fake reality of daycare and the fake reality of school, and then the fake reality of work, where it's all about presenting these images but not really emerging with reality. What a gift for a child to be told candidly by their parents, I hate your father for doing this because I don't know how to deal with it. And the child says, well, why don't you know how to deal with it? Well, I went to school the same place we're sending you, and they don't cover basic ideas of intelligence, and so we're pretty dumb. And you will be too if you continue to do what we tell you to do, because we're dumb. We have no idea what we're doing as a culture, as parents. I don't even know what an adult is. I mean, my body feels older, but I still feel angry and rebellious like I was 8. You're probably more mature than us at times. We're children. We know nothing. Well, this is useful information. A child would grasp, gosh, we've really got to do something with this planet. But it requires the courage to actually tell the truth. We do not know what we're doing as a species on this planet. Now, if children grasp that, and grasp that doing exactly what mom and dad does ends in disaster, you have a chance for a course correction. But this, don't worry, we are ruining the planet. We're going to continue ruining the planet. There's nothing to worry about. Everything's going to be okay. Just do what we say, and don't think, don't talk back, don't rock the boat. Do exactly what we did on our ongoing commitment to mutual annihilation. This is not, in other words, this divergence from reality is one of the biggest curses that we pass on to a normal child, because a good normal child learns to talk how wonderful their parents are, how great their culture and country is. Isn't it wonderful that we're going around in circles, causing vast amounts of unnecessary suffering and spending more and more of limited natural resources to do it? So we have the idea of handing children to a system as opposed to creating a system for our child. And I think that's a much better way of doing it. And when we understand Dunbar's number, and we understand that 150 people can create a completely new environment, admittedly hampered by their government, admittedly, sabotaged by their culture, but one can create a microculture in which one expends the energy to lift out of the cultural orbit. When a rocket takes place off of the planet's surface, almost all the energy of that whole space journey is just getting out of Earth's orbit. That's the amount of energy it takes to get out of a cult orbit. And we are all in a cult. We're all in the cult of normal, going nowhere fast, round and round, consuming more and more energy in the process. So to break out of that cult takes incredible amount of energy, and it takes a team effort. It's very difficult to do alone, but 150 people, 70 people. If you can find 70 people committed to data, committed to breaking orbit, committed to creating an intelligent environment. I look at my house here. It's $1 million house, and 30 feet from the front door is a dangerous street. So if I don't put up a fence, the dog could get out. If the dog gets out, he could get run over. If I had a child, if the child walked out in the street, it could run over. There are concrete steps to fall down. There is locks on the door because I'm exposed to strangers everywhere. There's car keys and alarms. There's cameras. All of this is an adaptive response to an unhealthy environment. In a healthy environment, with adults who are trustworthy, you do not need security cameras and doors and this and that. In a healthy community, you do not need to drive 2 hours to do your job and then drive 2 hours back putting gas into the atmosphere. You walk over to the bakery and bake bread for your community. You walk over to the office complex and virtually do work around the world. You walk to work, eliminating the energy expenditure of cars, but also the toxicity of gasoline, and also the damage to the atmosphere, and also the hyper-anxiety of all the grown-ups who, because a car was not designed to interact safely with an infant, infants are shouted at, bullied, anxietied about by the grown-ups because cars and infants are feet apart in our culture, rather than a fenced-in area to keep the cult out, and walking to work, getting exercise as opposed to racing in your car to a gym so that you can pay money to do the stuff that you could easily do walking. So you save money, you save gas, you save toxicity, you reduce your adrenaline. Your child is actually safe because you've had the decency to form a relationship with 70 human beings on the basis of intelligence, on the basis of efficiently laying out an environment in which that child feels safe, belonging, and welcome at home, where you don't teach your child, don't talk to strangers, because nobody is a stranger. They're your community. And if you don't have the competency to teach the members of your grown-up community to be adults, well, maybe you shouldn't be having children. It's a pretty basic level of competency. All of us that have been 30 years on the planet or more should actually know what it's like to be an adult. Oh, that's too much for us. Well, For heaven's sake, don't have a child then. Don't just copy and paste a system that's going to put another 100 tons in a landfill, terrorize another child, just because that's what other people were doing. Childhood trauma is no big deal, is the mantra. Oh, they'll get over it. They're screaming in their crib, whatever, etc. But no big deal. They'll get over it. How about having the courage and the decency to understand that if right now today, meaning you've had more experience on the planet than you've ever had before, by definition, you're a day older than you've ever been. So here you are, as competent as you've ever been, more knowledge and all that. Okay, well, let's recreate the infant environment for you. So first of all, we need to create a giant that is 30 feet tall. And there's going to be many of them lumbering around 30 feet today, right now. They weigh several tons to mimic the proportionality of infancy versus parents and grown-ups. You're surrounded by giants. These giants, starting today, are going to take control of your money. You have no legal rights. You have no money. You can't vote. Nobody's sending you censuses. How are you doing? Nobody even sends you a census today. What's your emotional well-being, 1 to 10? How terrified are you, 1 to 10? How much pain are you in, 1 to 10? Emotionally pain, physical pain. Your government doesn't want to know. It's free. You could send you an email as it is. No, they'll spend billions of dollars to send you snail mail, asking absolutely nothing. Are you black? Are you white? Is your income this or is it this? Who gives a fuck? You can be a billionaire on the edge of suicide, black or white, and you can be a musician who's just celebrating life because you bought your ideal guitar. They don't care about your feelings. The most important thing in life. Every human being in the history of humanity has done every single thing they've done with the end goal of feeling sustainably good and the end goal of avoiding feeling chronically bad. That's called feelings. Your government doesn't want to know, even if it's free. So this is, basic levels of maturity and competency here. So childhood trauma is no big deal. So these giants control your money, your vote. You can't even speak because they all speak Latin. They don't speak English. So you bellow out in English, give me some food, because they've decided that the food is going to be 3 feet taller than you are. Let's put the food up at 12 feet, right? No ladder, and put you in a pen, right? So just imagine 24 hours of infancy for you as a fully developed intellect. Starting tomorrow, giants, you can't reach the food, you can't get money, you don't speak Latin, they don't speak English. And what is your life going to be like in 24 hours? How much dread are you going to have that these people drinking and doing this and that and the other are not going to kill you? Some of them might. Some of them are going to take big brands of fire and stick them into the soles of your feet. It's a fun drunk game to do, isn't it? Burn the 30-year-old who's only 6 feet tall. We're 30 feet tall and 2 tons. What's he going to do? You try and get how much this one 24-hour day would affect you today if you entered a giant's world tomorrow. And then listen to the psychologist while you're going through this, say, oh, it's no big deal, it'll never affect things. You will spend the rest of your life dreading the giants and hoping they never return. And you're lucky if it can end in 24 hours, let alone 10 years. children with children is generally an incompetent model. One, it's not reality. You don't prepare people for reality by taking them out of reality. When you put a bunch of people in daycare or kindergarten, that's not real. If you look at the evolution of human beings, what would happen in hunter-gatherer times or whatever, the mother would carry the child. The monkey carries the small monkey. They do things together. And that's reality. You're learning how to be in reality by being in reality. Makes sense, right? Learn by doing, not by talking about doing. So this segregation of children with children, and particularly segregating abused children with abused children, which is segregating children with children in an abused culture, is you're not learning about reality, but you're desperately needing survival, security, love and belonging, etc. from an adult, which your child 10-year-old or your 6-year-old kindergarten buddy cannot do. They're narcissistically self-centered. Now, so might be your parents in an incompetent culture, but we need to move towards a reality of pairing, like not more than 3 young children with not less than 1 adult, not a grown-up, an adult. We don't need, sexual experimentation by the dissociated, shame-based teenager. We actually need an adult that's focused on the well-being and the development of the child, which, so eliminating the whole daycare segregation, all of that, and moving towards one of the most frustratingly and crazy things that I watch with children is I watch children wanting to do what mom and dad does and being told to go away, not taught how to do it. And children trying to do stuff for themselves and constantly, no, mommy will do that for you. So there's this tremendous, and you see a 10-year-old and he doesn't know how to cook. And he's just been trained into this state of profoundly cruel dependency. He's trained that he has no value, because otherwise you would want them contributing value. So this paradigm of pampering and pushing away the healthy independence and growth and contribution of a child needs to be turned on its head, to where as soon as you can, you are teaching a child to be useful, to learn their talents, to contribute value, and honoring each step of the way. That will never end. You want a 30-year-old to be learning a new talent that is going to flower in 5 years and give fruit to the community. You want a 50-year-old, you want an 80-year-old to be learning a new poem that can bring life to the community circle. How nice to have a community dinner and have an 85-year-old share a new poem that he's written over dinner. That they're actually an intelligent human being becoming a more intelligent human being day by day. Of course, we have this general idea that life isn't complete. You haven't learned life. It's all about you, the parent, right? You haven't had a full life if you haven't had a child. This idea of having children and that children are good makes sense if you're in a farm in the 17th century and 5 of your children are going to die, and the ones that remain are not going to put 100 tons in a landfill and destroy the planet, and are going to help till the farm. And they would not be sent off to daycare and told that they're useless. They'd actually start doing stuff by the time they're 5 years old. But we need to have a shift away from you need to have children to the children that are on the planet today need higher quality adults to interact with them and give birth to new templates. In other words, a shift from quantity to quality of care for the children, that many of whom do not have an adult, a single adult in their life. They have traumatized grown-ups that are feeding on the emotions, the bodies, the minds of their children. Going off to work and being beaten down, coming home and desperately trying to extract some sense of nourishment from their children rather than to teach service in adulthood. Any parent can have a child in our current system. No qualifications needed. You may need to get a license to drive a car, to get another license and be trained to fly a plane, because these are important things that affect adults. However, children, not very important. So you can be a fucked up, intergenerationally abused, addicted moron. That's good enough for this cult to support your right to bring in a new human being in an overpopulated planet. There's something very wrong with the education system that you can go through college without learning to be a competent parent. There's something very wrong with the grown-ups, that you can be a child and be raised by a grown-up and not learn to be a competent parent. We are an incompetent cult at producing competent parents. We don't even know what it looks like, let alone have a measuring system. But rather than saying that every parent has the right to have a child, what if we flipped it and said every child on the planet has a right to competent parenting? And if we do not work together to take care of the children and the grown-up children, you know, those arrested in trauma and fear and who can't let anyone near them and all that, that unless we take care of the human beings around us, there's a moratorium on childbirth. How about that? How about every child has a right, before being invited into the world, to know that there is at least one adult willing to take responsibility for optimal child rearing? What a novel idea. But it is an idea that is necessary to pivot away from the narcissistic, hedonistic, careless, oh, it would be nice to have that experience myself, and then put the child on a shelf when it ends up being beyond my competency level to deal with. It would be great if children had more rights than their parents, and if parents were held accountable. And it would be great if we gave people licenses to have a parent, or at least rankings. You must be ranked in parenting before you have a child, and your child is going to see your rank. Do you understand what active listening is? Do you understand what empathy is? Have you ever had an effective relationship? What's your quality of mental emotional development? Do you know the basic biology of a child? Have you done intergenerational abuse? What is your family system? Be ranked. It's always dangerous to get a government involved with saying what is and isn't accessible. But having a survey, a competency survey with recommendations that before you give birth to a child, before you get pregnant, you do this, this, and this, and including a little bit of this in high school, it's not too much of a stretch to alter the course of a completely unique individual's life for 80 years that you have to spend 5 hours being assessed by one competent psychologist about the likelihood of your child experiencing anything other than misery and torment in your incompetent care. Is that too much to ask for the leveraged well-being of 80 years of a unique individual that doesn't need to be brought onto the planet for your survival or the planet? Is that too much to ask? It is in our cult. There may indeed be adolescent outrage or young adult outrage. I should have the freedom to do whatever I want to do and fuck up as many people's lives as possible. But what about the right of that child to know that if they're going to be born, they've got decent statistical odds of having a highly intelligent life, a life that consumes less and less energy and delivers more and more sustainable well-being.